so thanks to those who are going to be watching this video. I've been looking forward to this for a while. I don't think that we've actually sat down, just you and I, and chatted. So this is an opportunity for me to introduce to my colleagues and friends, Chris Fabian, who is a longtime friend of mine. Chris, I was thinking back to when we first met, and I think it was in 2007 or 2008 in Phoenix, Arizona, at an Alliance for Innovation session. And so I don't want to embarrass you today, but man, what a start of our relationship there. You inspired me big time. Like, that day was the start of me having this epiphany around public service and how it could be and should be something bigger than just a job. So thanks for that. Like, a really big inspiration for me to be, do some things in my previous employment, but now starting my own company and trying to create as much value as I possibly can. So opportunity for me to thank you big time as well.
Well, Kelly, thanks for saying that. I definitely remember Phoenix and the Alliance Conference, and I remember that you're reaching out to us with emails ahead of the conference, and I didn't know what Strathcona County was in Alberta, and certainly wasn't sure what would take place when we met. And Kelly, right back at you, I'd say, as far as inspiration, the launch of all the work in priority-based budgeting, it has only gone the direction that it has because we've been able to meet people like you along the way who already had it in you to try to do something spectacular in public service. And so the ideas and the products mean nothing if we didn't run into the implementers, the catalysts, the real heroes of the story who could do something with these ideas. So that was you.
Super. Yeah, and I know it's kind of caught on in my region, which is awesome. There's so many high flyers out there now. John Dance comes to mind. Paul Edgington in Wetaskiwin now. I wonder, for the audience, they might not know this story, and I think it's a fascinating one. Could you share the birth of priority-based budgeting? You and John in Colorado, looking for, inspired to do something different and better. Many probably don't know that story.
Yeah, man, the origin story even goes back. I won't go back to the beginning of the Big Bang, Kelly, is where it all started, and the universe kept expanding. But for me personally, I was working in an engineering firm doing efficiency studies for communities here and there, and we'd save community X, Y, or Z. Save Laramie, Wyoming, $1 million on fleet. Save Georgetown, Colorado, $1 million in their water treatment plant. And our question was always, what becomes of that savings? What does the local government do with it? Do they refund the taxpayers? Do they take that $1 million and go invest it in something cool? There was something missing in our fulfillment in the work, which is for any sort of savings or achievement, what becomes of the money? And so out of inquisitiveness and a desire that our work has any meaning or impact whatsoever, this was back when I had a company called Local Government Solutions Group with a former city manager named Mike Freeman, who comes back later in our story. We were on a quest to find a bigger picture impact for the type of achievements that we were creating. And at the time, there was another group working on a concept called budgeting for outcomes, and they had endeavored to reconsider what budgeting might be. So just like I was looking at resources and where do they go, they were frustrated in their work with state governments and local governments. Same creators, by the way, of the Reinventing Government movement. This was David Osborne and Peter Hutchinson. And they were trying to figure out, well, budgeting often starts with line items And what if we started with outcomes instead and tried to really understand what resources are needed to produce a safer community or healthy people? And so we reached out to them. It said, we're coming at it from the ground up, and you guys are looking at it from a bigger picture, from the top down, and sparked up a really very positive partnership with some other people, just like you, Kelly, who are seekers in this space of public service. Long story short, we had the opportunity to work together in the city of Fort Collins, Colorado, who was one of the very first implementers of this budgeting for outcomes idea. And it was in the midst of that experience that we saw, wow, the promise of this very general idea that we should be concerned about our community's wealth towards outcomes that make people's lives better. But the process, the methodology seemed like it was good in some areas and needed some work in others, like anything that we do. So around the same time, City of Fort Collins was an early implementer, and so was Jefferson County, and so is Douglas County, in Colorado, in this strange place, something in the water. And so it was, I had the chance to go and work full-time at Jefferson County, and that's where John came along in the story as well. And together, while we were at Jefferson County, we had the idea, maybe we should try to create that budgeting for outcomes 2.0. And that became the very initial seeds of what was priority-based budgeting at the time. Again, long story short, we ventured out with nothing but spreadsheets and no real scalable implementation plan, depended on organizations like you who were resonating with these concepts, that we could really do something different if we could transform that budget process overall. And now, over a decade later, I'm looking at one of our first articles in 2008. It's a full-fledged movement, which is incredible.
Yeah, it's like I said, it was a big part of my career. And I remember when I finally was able to socialize this enough with my organization that we took the ball and run with it in 2013. And I'll never forget the day you spent facilitating a big strategic conversation with our council of the day in Calgary, and came up with goal statements owned and embraced by our council. They bought into the concept of bigger picture thinking. I think that was where the birthplace of our vision statement that largely has survived to today, about becoming Canada's most livable community, kind of leads me into my next question or thought around, now of course you're wearing the shirt Resource X, and to me the evolution of your work now has kind of led to this big generational legacy type thinking. And you've got some really amazing things going on, like say in Pittsburgh right now. And I wonder if you could maybe share your thought around that evolution and how these truly inspirational, big impact things that are going on right now, and municipalities thinking about them, when before there was a real level of granularity in their thinking, like from year to year almost. And I wonder if you could share the thought around that, and a little bit about maybe what's going on in Pittsburgh.
Absolutely. And funny, the Zoom call I was just on right before this one, it was Eric, Fabian, and I, and Grant Irvin from the city of Pittsburgh, which if your listeners are unfamiliar with Grant Irvin, you should definitely look him up in Pittsburgh. He is a complete inspiration to us. And again, like you, Kelly, just someone who we've hoped we would meet along the path, who could take this work and really understand the implications to something much bigger. And in Pittsburgh's case, that is funding their future towards climate action and really being a leader across the world in what they're doing. Grant was just in Glasgow for the climate conference that took place out there, along with Pittsburgh Mayor Peduto, talking about not only commitments for carbon reduction and reduction in emissions, but also the practical path to get there. We can have aspirational goals, but how do we fund it, and how do we get resources in the right place? So yeah, Kelly, back from when we first began, we did priority-based budgeting, and it was this interesting measurement tool. Okay, very practical, very engineering. Here's our budget, here's the resources, here's the taxes coming in. How does it get spent on services, and how do those services align or not so much with the outcomes that we seek? And we thought, that's clever. That's a nice priority-based budgeting is a handy measurement tool to mirror back. Are you putting your resources towards your outcomes or not? And what we discovered was, when you measure something like that, it certainly begs a next question, kind of like the peeling of the onion. For those areas where your resource alignment does not seem so aligned, what might you do to free up those resources? Stop investing in things that aren't aligned with what you're trying to accomplish, and maybe reallocate those resources towards what you aspire to do. And while logically, conceptually, that makes complete sense, let's do that. That begs an even more important question, which is, what would you do with a freed up $5 million? What would you do with freed up 10% of your budget? And that becomes a really challenging question, and one that we're not used to in public service. We're not used to saying, what do we do with all these extra resources? We're usually operating out of a place of scarcity, saying, what do we need to cut this year? We just don't have enough to go around. But what a magnificent place to be as a leader in public service. What could I do if I had a freed up 10% of my budget? Might I pursue some really bold, ambitious goals? And that's exactly where the Pittsburgh story came about, is through the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, and Bloomberg Philanthropies. They had a program devoted to a host of cities. The American Climate Challenge Cities program is what it was called. And these are communities who have realized they have these responsibilities towards climate action, and they have ambitions to really make a difference fast. And through the network of these organizations, what they were meant to do was talk about, well, what's the barrier? What's holding you back? And in Pittsburgh's case, it was as Grant tells the story, the fact that for all of their climate action initiatives, as it came time to budget for them and make sure that they're going to be committed to it in their business plans, they were described as unicorn projects. Unicorn as in something that doesn't exist, something magical or fictitious. And so what a disconnect and a letdown when we have our aspirations set, we have our vision for what our community can be, but the missing part is our resource allocation process does not recognize priorities in the right way. So kind of fast forwarding through Pittsburgh and their use of priority-based budgeting, it was, here's a tool, here's a practical approach to studying where every resource goes today, the programs that they're funding, exploring the priority and also the lack of alignment of some of their investments. And in their case, over what we call a program insight workshop, all departments across the entire organization came together over 3 program insight workshops to really study where their resources are going and collaboratively come up with resource reallocation recommendations and revenue enhancement recommendations. And they came up with $41 million wow. Of resources that they could commit towards their unfunded climate action plan. They call it budgeting for climate, and they call it, if you look at an executive order that Mayor Peduto put into action, applying a rigorous climate lens to all budget decisions. Every single budget recommendation that came through had to be scrutinized with its impact on climate. And we were just like, we didn't come up with that. It was Pittsburgh's use case that required priority-based budgeting be applied in a certain way. And now we can imagine that this same approach is replicable for communities across the world. And we definitely hope that that's going to be the next step.
Well, and I'm thinking, so I'm assuming there will be lots of regional people that will watch this, given that it's going to be on my social media and my website. And a few come to mind for me. City of Edmonton, lots of talk around homelessness. And I imagine it's probably the same scenario. This is a political football that gets passed around by different orders of government. And somewhat legitimately so, the municipality can say, well, really, you know, homelessness is not necessarily in our mandate. But if you think a little bit differently about it, and you know, there's one citizen and there's one homeless person, they don't care who it is that comes up with solutions. And you know, I know that they're working with you, City of Edmonton. Maybe that's one of their big legacy issues that they want to tackle, and think about it a little bit differently, in that, you know, citizen well-being, that's, I use that term a lot. That's another one that comes to mind. Indigenous communities in Canada have had the, you know, the ability to share their story like they have never before in this country. And I wonder what, you know, that lens would look like if we thought about what we already have and making things a priority, instead of this maybe confirmation bias that we just use the tools that we've had in the past, like taxing more or asking for more, and the budgets just get bigger and bigger and bigger, but we just apply them to the same things. We never really critique whether they're getting the most value for the most relevant things. So, oh man, super things going on in Pittsburgh, and I know there's other cases like that on your website. I wonder now about, for me, you know, there's the tools and there's the applications and things. I'd like to get your thoughts a little bit more on some of the intangible things that start happening in municipalities when you start going down the road of thinking a little bit differently. For me, I'll share, you know, at our pinnacle of the use of the tools and the mindset in Strathcona County, you know, departments started challenging each other to say, you know, things like, you've had a couple of FTE that have been sitting there for a couple years not being used, and proactively they'd be bringing forward these options to reallocate those positions. So it was this mindset of corporate or community or citizen, and like I said, best use of resources. But it started becoming this almost a challenge to each department to come up with more and more to put on the table, and just like these relevancy conversations versus efficiency and effectiveness. What do you see happening in some of your partners that you're working with?
I love the direction of this, of your question, Kelly. And one of the stories that comes to mind, I'll tell you, is from a real leader, a county in Wisconsin called Washington County. So I think what is nice about priority-based budgeting is that all departments feel like there is some what Shane Kavanaugh from GFOA calls procedural justice. We're all on the same playing field. We get to start, just like when you were talking about Strathcona setting its purpose statements out there in Calgary when we were together, we all come to level set that this is what we're in business to do. This is our responsibility to our community from a perspective of results, which is different from saying, here's my department or here's my division and here's what I want to accomplish, which is still important. But instead we have a broad responsibility, each one of us across the organization, to come through and fulfill these results, these priorities overall. And how we get there is a matter of the programs and the projects that we implement and our use of resources. And it is an invitation as well for a department head to say, hey, I have resources that I believe are not so aligned with those results, and here's what we could do with them. But we all know that sometimes that's a really nice ideal situation, but it also sets a context that sets other things in motion, and that's where I wanted to share with you the example from Washington County. So Washington County does the measurement exercise, and lo and behold, at the end, in their community, one of the departments, many of their programs were seen to be less in alignment with the results that the organization had settled on. And so that begs the question, is it wise for us to use our scarce resources as a county to fund programs in that department? It was a parks department in this county government where they just did not perceive of all the priorities that they are in business to accomplish for them in their specific region. Parks were just less of a priority. That's not the case in so many communities, but it was there. So recognizing that, the parks director said, we get it. We appreciate that this is our set of priorities, and we just don't align very well. However, before we move immediately to how do we cut the parks operation overall, their parks director said, give us 3 years. Give us 3 years to come up with entrepreneurial ways that we can fund ourselves without being reliant on the scarce general government resources of the county that we have to go to other priorities. Give us 3 years to seek out some other alternative means of funding ourselves, and they called it their financial independence plan. And Kelly, was earlier this year, was the very first year that they achieved 100% independence from any use of their property tax, which was how they were funded in the past. Mm-hmm. They went from 100% dependent with very scarce few program user fees or program revenues to 100% independent, therefore giving all of the property tax back to the county to then reallocate towards other high priority programs. And to me, that's such an inspiring story, even though, I personally enjoy the parks and put a high value on them for quality of life? Of course I do. So that's not the inspiring part to me. The inspiring part is any of our departments can be empowered to actually think about the whole thing differently. How can I find different sources of funding? How might I partner like their parks department did? I am not passive or beholden to somebody else's giving me resources. I can seek an entrepreneurial path and achieve financial independence. And that's the kind of surprising stories that can come about.
I'm going to use that because I'm going to delve into that example a little bit, because I've wondered recently how municipalities will continue to keep up with the demands in that space specifically. So recreation, and these days it's my community, for example, we're big into pickleball now, and it came up rather quickly in my estimation. Like it wasn't on our radar, then all of a sudden it was in a big way. And I think there's a lot of services like that, or real niche services that'll be really hard for municipalities to continue to keep up with that pace. So, I've been talking to a lot of my partners that I work with. If you're thinking really longer term, I think you might have to be picking a smaller suite of options as the municipality, but really, look at those partnership opportunities with private or with community groups, so that the burden isn't just on the taxpayer, like you said. Yeah. No, I'll probably reach out to them or follow up with you after.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So one of the things that now that I have you and we're chatting and it's a bit casual, I was wondering what Chris's own personal legacy that he's thinking about leaving. I know you've been building the company and it's been growing and evolving, and Have you given any thought to Chris's personal story? Like what's going to be Mr. Fabian's legacy out of all of this work?
Oh man. I'm happy to just be a role player, a contributor towards this direction that I think so many people really want to go anyway. I was talking to the city of Eugene, Oregon city manager, and she was just reflecting, she's been in public service much longer than I have, and at a city manager level. And she was reflecting that, you get into the profession, you get into public service, and you have all these extremely high hopes for what you can do in local government, that are not necessarily available in other industries. You have such a clear connection to your society and your neighbors, and people and homeless, people experiencing homelessness, and you have such a profound opportunity to make an impact. And then she described that, however, from that first day to somewhere along the line, there's some skepticism that seeps in, and you come across these barriers where, man, it just seems like you're not able to do as much as you had hoped or aspired to do, and you certainly don't want to become pessimistic when you are the one person who can have that opportunity to create such positive change. But in part of her reflection, she said, we have these millions of dollars coming into our organization that all of our people provide, and it just seems like something's not working. Like the budget is not delivering on its promise of what we could do with all this collective wealth to respond to the needs of our community overall. And so what has put her back on the path of like being all fired up is maybe we can change that. And I think that is, in terms of any sort of legacy that I want to be involved in, it's maybe restoring that passion to change agents in local government who already started there. Their heart is in the right place. They want to be in this field, but then they have come to realize, whether it's politics these days or resources or many other things, there are profound forces in their way. And if we can help to eliminate some of those barriers and put them back on the path, maybe we can do a heck of a lot of good. Specifically, I think the dialogue around, should we be taxing the people more, as you brought up a moment ago, or do we just give up services? I've always felt like that's a false choice. That is not at all your only two options. Ask the people for more money, or we just have to not be able to provide any sort of response to climate action or equity or homelessness or the equity for Indigenous people. And so what do we do? And as we have seen some of the communities in priority-based budgeting endeavor to reallocate upwards of 10% of their budget or more, it's been so inspiring to say, like, yes, that's another answer, is doing better with the resources we have, doing something differently with the resources we have, creating new business models, creating partnerships, being entrepreneurial like Washington County, freeing up 41 million like Pittsburgh. None of those solutions required cutting the budget. None of those solutions required taxing people more. And yet we could achieve so much more. And where we get really excited is that maybe reallocation of 10% of your budget shouldn't be extraordinary, where we go, whoa, that's never heard of anything like that before. But we want to make it ordinary and repeatable and part of a skill set that everybody can master, and that some amount of years into the future, we look back and we say, that sort of resource liquidity, the ability to free up resources and reallocate quickly towards our changing needs, becomes the normal and is not seen as extraordinary. And we have a long way to go till we get there. But if that's anything along the lines of a legacy that we want to leave, that we can tackle these big problems, like funding a plan towards climate action at the local level in our communities, that we don't have to feel like, man, we just don't have the resources to go after solutions for people experiencing homelessness, or that we talk a big game around creating equity, but we don't have the resources to fund it because we have all these other nuts and bolts core services we have to provide. If we do anything at Resource X, we speed up and accelerate the mastery of this skill set for nimbleness with resources, for reallocation, that we now convince ourselves that we can tackle these problems, and that's where we want to head.
Yeah, two words come to mind for me. It's back to that cultural thing that we talked about earlier, and habitual. Like it's just the way we do things now, right? So yeah, and I think you're well on your way. I don't know that that's legacy thinking. I think it's already happening. So bravo. One last thing, and this is again more on the personal side of things. I wanted to leave people with a little bit of a nugget of maybe a book that you have read or are reading that you would suggest others might get a lot of value out of. I'll preempt you and share one because I don't want you to steal this one. I know you've probably read this one. I would love for people to read the book Sapiens. And there's a series of 3, but the first one, for me, that was an absolute game changer. It's had an impact on my own personal life and some thinking that I thought I had figured out, and it's a history of the species, very fact-based, and it's probably one that I've seen the least amount of bias in, which is eye-opening for me, because most of the books out there, and it's hard not to have this happen, have a bit of a bias, but it's very fact-based, and I was inspired by it.
That book has been high on my list, Kelly. Maybe if I have some holiday time coming up here, I might. Thank you for reminding me of it. It's something I've thought about for a few years, and it's always looked really cool. I'm gonna pull this one off my shelf real fast. I thought this book, it's called The Future of Humanity by a physicist, Michio Kaku, and it is a huge zoom out at different scenarios for the future of humanity and the species. And I think sometimes, I know I end up this way. You wake up, you have your agenda ahead, you have so many things you need to get done, you have your family to take care of, and it's very easy, and it's good to be present and engaged in the present. There's no question about that. But I think it's also very fascinating to really take a big step back and think about, where is this all headed? Where could we go? What if we imagine different ways of in this book, they talk about harnessing solar energy and freeing ourselves up from pollution, but also making energy almost free for everybody. Like, what does that do? And those types of big picture questions, I find inspiring for where we could take any of our futures. And I loved the book. It's not technical at all. It's written by a physicist, but ensure they get into space exploration, just like they get into free energy, and maybe a future without the necessity of occupation to be paid. All those sorts of implications are they intrigue me. So
I'm glad you had it handy and showed it. I should have had Sapiens handy as well. I'm going to look it up. And the Sapiens series gets to that point where it does talk about the history, and then he gets into 21 lessons for the 21st century, and Homo Deus, which is us now. So they're all really good. Chris, this has been awesome. Thanks. I I need more time to chat with you, but I think our paths cross less now because those things that we're trying to achieve and sharing value are kind of getting in the way. But I definitely appreciate the time, and I'm always again, I use the word inspired a lot, but chatting with you gets my engines going and gets me thinking about doing great things. So thanks for today.
Well, thank you so much, Kelly. Thanks for being a part of my life. Thanks for being such an influential contributor to all of this work and the direction that we've gone. Your fingerprints are all over it. And yes, our paths haven't crossed so much because of this darn pandemic. But I intend to get back to the region as soon as I possibly can, including, I know I was talking with Edmonton and St. Albert about a trip in 2022. So certainly we'll time that around an Oilers game if possible, to make sure that we get a chance to be together and hang out, and maybe even find that amazing Edmonton taco stand that I don't know the name of, but I think about often.
Let's make sure we book it. It'll be great to see you again. Thanks so much, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Kelly.